I bought a mountain cabin to start a new life. My brother suddenly called me and casually said, "We already registered your new house as a business investment." I immediately called the sheriff, but my father pulled out a document that shocked everyone. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 36 years old, and until recently, I thought working harder could solve almost anything. For nearly 15 years, I lived by my calendar. If there was a problem at work, I stayed late. If someone called in sick, I covered the shift. If a deadline got moved up, I canceled my weekend without thinking twice. I was an operations manager for a large company, and somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to have a life that belonged to me. People used to tell me I was successful. The paycheck was good. The title sounded impressive. But every Sunday night, I dreaded Monday morning. One day, I caught myself answering emails while standing in line at a grocery store, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd spent an entire day without checking my phone. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. So I made a decision that surprised almost everyone around me. I resigned. Not because I had another job waiting. I just couldn't keep living the same way. For years, I'd been putting money aside without telling anyone exactly why. Then I found it. A small mountain cabin about 3 hours from the city. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet place surrounded by pine trees, with a stone fireplace, a wide porch, and enough distance from traffic that, at night, you could hear the wind through the forest. The first time I walked through the front door, I didn't picture parties or holidays. I pictured silence. Closing day felt strangely emotional. When I signed the final document, the realtor smiled and handed me the keys. "Congratulations," she said. "Welcome home." Those 2 words stayed with me the whole drive. Moving day wasn't glamorous. Most of my furniture was still wrapped in blankets. Half the kitchen was packed inside cardboard boxes. I laughed when I couldn't find my coffee mugs, grabbed a paper cup from a moving box, and figured that was good enough for the first night. There wasn't any schedule. No conference calls. No notifications demanding my attention every 5 minutes. Just me. I unpacked a few essentials, made the bed, and stacked the rest of the boxes against one wall. Around sunset, I stepped outside with a mug of coffee. The air was colder than I expected, but it felt clean. No sirens, no traffic. Just birds settling into the trees and the occasional breeze moving through the branches. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. Later that evening, I lit the fireplace. I sat on the couch watching the flames, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Then my phone rang. Ethan, my older brother. I almost let it go to voicemail, not because we were fighting, but Ethan had a habit of calling whenever he wanted something, and after a full day of moving, I wasn't in the mood for a long conversation. Still, I answered. "Hey," I said. "Hey, Nat," he replied, sounding unusually cheerful. "Made it to the cabin?" "Yeah, just got settled in." "Good. Mom and Dad are excited." I smiled a little. "About the cabin?" "Yeah," he said casually. "We've all been talking about it." Something about the way he said "we've" made me pause. Before I could ask what he meant, he kept going. "So, here's what we're thinking. I figured Mom and Dad should take the main floor. The stairs aren't getting any easier for Dad." I frowned. "Okay. And I'll use that office you mentioned. It'll be perfect for running my business." I looked around the room as if someone else might explain what was happening. He wasn't asking. He was assigning rooms. Then he laughed. "You'll be fine in the guest room for a while. Honestly, you don't need that much space anyway." I didn't answer. For a second, I wondered if I'd misunderstood him. Maybe he was joking. "Ethan." "What? Whose guest room are you talking about?" There was a short silence. Then he sounded genuinely confused. Yours. Another pause. I mean, our family's house. The words landed so casually you'd think we'd discussed this months ago, like everyone had already voted. Like I was the only person who somehow missed the meeting. I tightened my grip on the phone. Ethan. Yeah? I took a slow breath. What time are you all planning to get here? I kept holding my phone even after the call ended. The screen had already gone dark, but I was still staring at my own reflection. The cabin was quiet again. A few minutes earlier, that silence had felt comforting. Now it felt different. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and slowly walked through the house. The living room, the guest bedroom, the small office Ethan had just claimed without asking, then the primary bedroom. Every room suddenly felt smaller, not because anything had changed, but because someone else had already decided how they planned to use it. I stopped in front of the window overlooking the trees. This is my house, I said out loud. It sounded strange hearing myself say it, not because it wasn't true, because I suddenly felt like I had to prove it. For a moment, I wondered if I'd overreacted. Maybe Ethan had gotten carried away. Maybe Mom and Dad didn't even know he was talking like that. I almost convinced myself to call him back. Then I remembered something. When I was 16, my parents had rearranged my bedroom while I was away at a school trip. I came home and couldn't find half my things. Mom smiled and said, "You'll like it once you get used to it." Nobody had asked what I wanted. Back then, everyone acted like I was being dramatic for caring. Standing in my own cabin years later, that memory didn't feel random anymore. It felt familiar. Instead of calling Ethan back, I searched for the number of a local security company. The woman who answered sounded friendly. "Mountain Ridge Security, how can I help you?" "I just moved into a new property," I said. "I'd like every exterior lock replaced as soon as possible." "Any security concerns?" I hesitated for a second. "My family still has copies of older keys from another house. They don't have keys to this place, but I'd rather not take chances." She didn't laugh. She didn't question me. "First available appointment is tomorrow morning. We can also reprogram the garage access if you'd like." "Please do." By the time I hung up, I felt a little more in control. Not calm, just organized. There was a difference. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee even though it was getting late. I carried it onto the porch, hoping the mountain air would clear my head. Instead, I kept replaying Ethan's voice. "Mom and Dad will take the main floor. You'll be fine in the guest room." Not, "Would you mind?" Not, "What do you think?" Just instructions. I finally admitted something to myself. He hadn't called to ask permission. He'd called because he assumed he already had it. That thought pushed me to make one more phone call. The county sheriff's office. The deputy who answered listened without interrupting while I explained the situation. "I own the property," I said. "No one has moved in yet. But I have reason to believe some relatives may show up expecting to stay." There was a short pause. Then he asked, "Have you invited them?" "No." "Have you given anyone permission to live there?" "No." "Good." His answer surprised me. "Good?" You'd be amazed how many property disputes start with one sentence. "What sentence?" "They're just staying for a few days." He let that sink in before continuing. "If someone isn't welcome on your property, don't create confusion by making exceptions. Family disagreements become legal headaches when expectations aren't clear." I looked around my cabin again. The walls, the fireplace, the unopened boxes. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Yet somehow, it already felt like I was protecting it from people who hadn't even arrived. The deputy gave me a few practical suggestions. Keep copies of my closing documents nearby. Don't hand over keys. If anyone showed up and refused to leave, call the sheriff's office immediately instead of arguing. His calm voice made the whole situation feel less emotional, More procedural, almost ordinary. After hanging up, I found the folder containing my closing paperwork and placed it on the kitchen table. For the first time that evening, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. I spent another hour unpacking a few boxes, plates, a couple of books. The coffee maker I'd almost forgotten. Doing ordinary things helped. At least for a little while. Then my phone buzzed again. I expected another call from Ethan. It wasn't. Just one text message. Short. Simple. And somehow colder than the phone conversation had been. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I read Ethan's text 3 times. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. No explanation, no smiley face, no love you. Just that. I typed a reply, deleted it, started another one, deleted that too. For once, I didn't want to argue over text. I had a feeling he'd twist every word into proof that I was being unreasonable. I put my phone face down on the counter. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. Another message. You'll understand once everyone's there. That one bothered me even more. Not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded certain, as if my opinion was just another obstacle they'd deal with once they arrived. I barely slept. Every little sound outside made me look toward the windows. Branches scraping the roof. A truck somewhere down the mountain road. The old heater kicking on. Nothing was actually happening, but my mind wouldn't slow down. Early that morning, the security technician showed up right on time. His name was Mike. He spent about an hour replacing every exterior lock and reprogramming the garage keypad. While he worked, he asked the usual questions. Vacation place? No, I said. Home. He smiled. Good choice. Quiet out here. I almost laughed. It was until yesterday. He glanced at me for a second but didn't pry. I appreciated that. When he handed me the new keys, he said, "Only these work now." Such a simple sentence. It made me feel better than it probably should have. Once he left, I finally unpacked enough kitchen supplies to make breakfast. I forced myself to sit down instead of pacing. I needed to think, not panic. Think. The problem was, every time I tried to focus on the house, another memory came back. When I was 24, Ethan had fallen behind on his car payments. He called me late one night. I just need a little help. A little help turned into almost $6,000. He promised he'd pay me back. He never did. A few years later, Dad needed unexpected medical treatment that insurance didn't fully cover. I paid part of the bill without telling anyone else. Mom cried. She hugged me. She called me her rock. Then, less than a year later, Ethan's business ran into trouble. Again. He sat across from me at a coffee shop with spreadsheets spread across the table. I just need enough to get through this rough patch. I transferred the money the next day. That rough patch somehow lasted years. Funny thing is, I never kept score. Not because I was generous. Because I honestly believed that's what family did. You helped each other. No questions asked. Looking back, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. Nobody ever asked how helping them affected me. The conversation was always about what they needed, never about what it cost me. I walked onto the porch with another cup of coffee. The mountain air was crisp enough that I could see my breath. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't looking at the trees. I was looking backward, trying to figure out when this pattern had started. Mom used to call it doing what's best for the family. Dad rarely raised his voice. He didn't have to. He'd simply announce a decision like it had already been made. And somehow, everyone adjusted. Especially me. Ethan grew up expecting that system to work in his favor. If he made a mistake, someone else fixed it. Usually me. That realization hit harder than I expected. Not because it was new, because it wasn't. I had seen it for years. I'd just never named it. Around lunchtime, my phone rang again. Mom. I let it ring until it stopped. A minute later, she left a voicemail. Her voice sounded cheerful. "Sweetheart, don't overthink this. Your brother is just excited. We'll all figure everything out together." Together. That word used to comfort me. Now it sounded strangely one-sided. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my laptop. I searched for local property attorneys. There were several names. I clicked through reviews, websites, and office locations. One profile caught my attention. Rachel Bennett, real estate disputes, property ownership, family property conflicts. I stared at her contact page for a few seconds. Part of me still felt ridiculous. Was I really about to hire a lawyer because of one phone call? Another part of me remembered Ethan's texts, and how certain he'd sounded. I picked up my phone. Before I could second-guess myself again, I pressed the call button to schedule an appointment with Rachel Bennett. Rachel Bennett's office wasn't what I expected. I had pictured a polished downtown law firm with marble floors and expensive furniture. Instead, it was a small office in a quiet building just outside the county courthouse. Comfortable, organized. The receptionist smiled, offered me coffee, and asked me to have a seat. A few minutes later, Rachel walked out herself. She looked to be in her early 40s, carrying a legal pad instead of a laptop. "Natalie? That's me." She shook my hand. "Come on back." Her office overlooked a row of pine trees, which somehow made the whole conversation feel less intimidating. She didn't rush into legal terms. She didn't ask for paperwork first. She simply sat across from me and said, "So, tell me what happened." I started with the phone call, then Ethan's texts, the sheriff, the locks. Every few minutes, I'd stop and apologize because I felt like I was rambling. Rachel would just nod. "Keep going." When I finished, she closed her notebook without writing anything else. Then she asked one question. "Has anyone in your family ever respected your no?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I honestly couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, because I was suddenly replaying years of conversations in my head. No usually became a discussion, then an argument, then guilt. Eventually, it became fine. Rachel waited. She wasn't trying to fill the silence. Finally, I shook my head. "I don't think so." She nodded like she'd already suspected that answer. "That's important." "Why?" "Because this isn't just about a house." She leaned back in her chair. "If someone has spent years believing your boundaries are negotiable, they don't suddenly change because you signed real estate paperwork." That sentence stayed with me. She wasn't describing Ethan. She was describing my entire family. Rachel reached for a yellow legal pad and started making a list. First, revoke permission before anyone claims they misunderstood your intentions. "I never gave them permission." "Good. Let's keep it that way." She wrote another note. "Second, save every text message, voicemail, email, and screenshot. I still have everything. Don't delete anything, even if it makes you angry." I nodded. "Third, gather every document connected to this property. The closing papers, everything. Purchase agreement, title documents, mortgage paperwork, insurance, receipts if you've already bought furniture, anything that establishes a timeline." I was surprised by how practical everything sounded. No dramatic lawsuits, no threats, just preparation. Rachel looked up from her notes. "And one more thing." "Okay. If Ethan sends another message trying to bait you into an argument, ignore it?" "Exactly." She smiled. "People often reveal more when they think you're not fighting back." That hadn't occurred to me. I admitted something I'd been thinking since the phone call. "I keep wondering if maybe I'm making this bigger than it is." Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "Did your brother sound surprised when you questioned him?" I thought back to the conversation. "No." Did he hesitate before assigning rooms? No. Did he ask if your parents could stay with you? No. She folded her hands. That's what concerns me. I frowned. He sounded prepared. Exactly. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. Confident people usually believe they have a reason to be confident. The room suddenly felt quieter. Until that moment, I'd been treating Ethan's behavior like arrogance. Rachel seemed to see something different. Preparation. Planning. As our meeting wrapped up, she handed me a checklist with everything she wanted me to gather before we spoke again. I slid it into my folder. I'll get all of this together. I know you will. She walked me toward the door, then stopped before I reached the hallway. Natalie. I turned around. I've handled a lot of family property disputes. She paused for just a second. I don't think your brother came up with this idea overnight. I waited for her to continue. Rachel looked at me carefully and said, I think we should find out why he's so confident. Rachel kept her word. She didn't tell me to sit around and wait. She told me to live my life while she started digging. Let me see what your brother has been doing publicly, she said before we ended the meeting. Sometimes people are much less careful than they think. So I drove back to the cabin with a folder full of paperwork and a checklist sitting in the passenger seat. I promised myself I wasn't going to let this situation steal the reason I'd bought the place in the first place. That turned out to be harder than I expected. I unpacked another stack of boxes, hung a couple of pictures, finally found my favorite coffee mug. Little victories. The kind of ordinary moments I'd been looking forward to for years. But every few hours I'd pick up my phone and open the security camera app. The driveway, the porch, the back deck. Nothing. I'd lock my phone, tell myself I was being ridiculous. Then check it again an hour later. One afternoon, I decided I needed to get out of the house. There was a small general store a few miles down the mountain, so I drove over to pick up groceries. The cashier recognized me immediately. You must be the new owner of the cabin up on Ridge Road. I guess word travels fast. She laughed. It always does around here. As she packed my groceries, an older man standing behind me smiled. Beautiful property, he said. You're going to love it up there. For a second, I relaxed. People were friendly. Nobody seemed to know anything about my family. For the first time in days, I had a conversation that wasn't about conflict. Driving back, I caught myself thinking maybe Rachel was right. Maybe preparation was enough. Maybe nothing would actually happen. That feeling lasted until my phone rang. Rachel. Do you have a minute? Something in her voice made me pull over before answering. Yeah, what's going on? I found a business registration. I frowned. What kind of business? It was filed under your brother's name. I waited. The company is called Brooks Mountain Escapes LLC. I didn't recognize the name. So, Rachel took a slow breath. The registered business address is your cabin. I stared through the windshield. No. I'm looking at the filing right now. That's impossible. I hadn't even moved in yet. I know. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the truck idling beside the road. Finally, I asked, could it just be a mistake? It's possible. Rachel didn't sound convinced. But businesses usually don't accidentally register someone else's residential address. My stomach tightened. I turned off the engine. The silence inside the truck suddenly felt heavy. When was it filed? Rachel clicked through another document. Several months ago. I closed my eyes. Months? Yes. That timeline didn't make sense. I hadn't even signed the final closing papers yet. How could Ethan use an address that wasn't officially mine? Unless... No. I stopped myself before making assumptions. Rachel had already told me not to jump ahead of the facts. I'll send you everything I found, she said. Okay. And Natalie? Yeah? Don't contact Ethan yet. I wasn't planning to. Good. There's something about this that doesn't add up. When we hung up, I stayed parked on the side of the road for another minute. The mountains were exactly as peaceful as they'd been when I first drove in. Nothing around me had changed, but my reason for buying this place suddenly felt much farther away. Back at the cabin, I opened the email Rachel had just sent. There it was. Official state registration. Brooks Mountain Escapes, LLC. My address. My cabin. My hands tightened around the printed pages. I was still trying to understand how Ethan had managed to do that when my phone rang again. Rachel, I answered immediately. I found something else, she said. This is even bigger than the business registration. I answered before the second ring. Rachel? I found the website. I frowned. What website? There was a brief pause. The one advertising your cabin. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. What? Your cabin. She sounded calm, but I could tell she was choosing every word carefully. I searched the company name through a few travel listings and archived pages. Brooks Mountain Escapes isn't just a registered business. She took a breath. They've been marketing your house. I slowly sat down at my kitchen table. What do you mean, marketing it? They're presenting it as a luxury mountain retreat. My eyes drifted toward the windows, the same windows I'd spent days looking out of, convinced I was finally home. Rachel continued. They used exterior photos. Photos from the real estate listing? Looks like it. And interior pictures, too. That stopped me. There weren't many interior photos online. No, she agreed. But there were enough. A few seconds passed before I found my voice. Can you send me everything? You'll have it in a minute. When the email arrived, I opened it immediately. There it was. A polished booking page with professionally written descriptions. Luxury mountain retreat. Perfect for family vacations. Private office space. Sleeps 8 guests. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. They hadn't changed much. They didn't have to. The pictures were mine. The address was mine. The house was mine. Yet someone had built an entire business around it without ever asking me. Rachel called again before I'd finished scrolling. There's more. I almost laughed. At that point, I wasn't sure I wanted there to be more. What else? I found reviews. Reviews? They're from people asking questions before booking. I swallowed. So nobody actually stayed there? Not yet. That single phrase should have made me feel better. Instead, it didn't. Rachel continued. I also found payment records connected to the booking platform. Meaning? There are confirmed reservations. I closed my laptop for a second. No. Yes. People actually paid? They placed deposits. My chest tightened. Complete strangers believed they had rented my cabin. They were making vacation plans around a house I had just moved into. For the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about my family. I was thinking about those people. They had no idea they were caught in the middle of something they never signed up for. Rachel seemed to read my mind. This isn't only a family dispute anymore. I know. Now we have third parties relying on false information. That changed everything. Up until then, I'd been trying to protect my home. Now there were records, transactions, customers, a business using my property without permission. Rachel's voice became more direct. I don't want you confronting anyone. I wasn't planning to. Good. Here's what I do want. I grabbed a notebook. Print every email I've sent you. Okay. Save screenshots of the listings. I wrote it down. Don't rely on the website staying online. Got it. And keep every ownership document together. By the end of the call, my kitchen table had turned into a workspace. Closing documents, insurance papers, the deed, receipts from the lock replacement, copies of Ethan's messages. Everything went into labeled folders. It felt strangely calming. Every piece of paper reminded me of one simple fact. The truth didn't need embellishment. It just needed proof. Friday evening settled over the mountains. The cabin was quiet again. I made dinner, though I barely tasted it. Before going to bed, I checked the cameras one last time. Empty driveway, empty porch. Nothing unusual. I almost convinced myself that maybe we'd have another day to prepare. Saturday morning proved me wrong. My phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the camera feed. A large moving truck had just turned onto the road leading straight toward my cabin. The motion alert wasn't wrong. I watched the live camera feed as the moving truck slowly climbed the last stretch of road toward my cabin. A dark SUV followed close behind. Then another car. I didn't need to zoom in to know who it was. Rachel was already on her way. So were the deputies from the sheriff's office. We had agreed on one thing the night before. No confrontation unless everyone who needed to be there was present. I stepped onto the porch just as the truck rolled into the driveway. Its engine rumbled to a stop. The driver climbed out first, looking around as if he expected someone to tell him where everything should go. Then Ethan opened the SUV door. He smiled the second he saw me. Not an apologetic smile, not even an awkward one. It was the smile of someone who thought the difficult part was already over. "There she is," he called out. "I knew you'd come around." "I didn't." He chuckled like I'd made a joke. Mom climbed out next. She looked around the property with genuine excitement. "Oh, Natalie," she said. "It's even prettier in person." Dad walked past both of them, studying the cabin like he was inspecting a house he'd already bought. "I'll take a look at the main floor," he muttered. Nobody asked if they could. They simply started walking. The moving crew opened the back of the truck. Boxes, mattresses, furniture wrapped in moving blankets, a dining table, lamps, plastic storage bins with handwritten labels. This wasn't luggage for a weekend. They had packed up enough to live here. One of the movers picked up a box. Ethan pointed toward the front door. "Just inside the entryway for now." The man started walking. I raised my hand. "Please don't." He stopped immediately and looked between Ethan and me. Ethan sighed. "Natalie, don't make these guys stand around all morning. They're not bringing anything into my house." He smiled again, but this time it looked forced. "We've already been through this." "No. You talked." I listened. Dad had reached the front door by then. Without saying a word, he pulled a key ring from his pocket. I recognized the old brass key. It wasn't even for this house. He slid it into the lock anyway. Nothing. He frowned. Tried again. Still, nothing. Mom looked over. "What's wrong?" Dad jiggled the handle. "The key isn't working." "It won't," I said calmly. I had every lock replaced. Silence settled over the driveway. Ethan stared at me for a long second. "You changed the locks?" "Yes." His expression finally shifted. Not anger, disbelief. "You actually thought we'd break in?" "I made sure only the homeowner has access." Mom stepped closer. "Honey, why would you do something like that?" Before I could answer, another vehicle turned into the driveway, then another. Rachel parked first. Behind her came two sheriff's deputies. The mood changed instantly. The movers quietly set their boxes back inside the truck. One of them took a few steps away, clearly realizing this wasn't an ordinary move. Rachel walked over carrying a folder. She gave me a small nod before speaking to anyone else. One deputy addressed everyone in a calm voice. "Morning. We've been asked to be present to prevent any misunderstanding regarding this property." Ethan folded his arms. "This is completely unnecessary." The deputy didn't argue. "Ms. Brooks is the legal owner of the residence. Unless she gives permission, no one enters the home." Mom looked genuinely confused. "But we're family." The deputy answered politely. "I understand, ma'am." His tone never changed. But ownership doesn't change because of family relationships. For the first time all morning, nobody had anything to say. The only sounds were the truck engine idling and the wind moving through the trees. Then Dad quietly walked back to the SUV. He opened the passenger door, reached inside, and pulled out a thick blue folder. He looked directly at Rachel before holding it up. "We already have an agreement." Dad held the blue folder like it settled everything. "We already have an agreement." Nobody moved. One of the deputies looked at Rachel. Rachel simply held out her hand. "May I?" Dad hesitated. For the first time that morning, he looked less certain than he had a minute earlier. Still, he handed it over. Rachel opened the folder without saying a word. Several neatly printed pages, a cover sheet, multiple signatures, even a notary seal. From where I was standing, it looked surprisingly official. My stomach dropped. For one awful moment, I wondered if I'd forgotten something. Had I signed paperwork years ago without reading it? Had someone slipped documents into a stack during another family matter? Rachel kept reading. No expression, no reaction. Just turning one page after another. The silence stretched long enough that even Ethan stopped talking. Mom folded her arms. "I told you," she said softly. "We're not trying to take anything from you. We just wanted everyone to have something together." I looked at her. "If that's true, why didn't anyone ask me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward Dad. He avoided my eyes. Ethan stepped forward. "This was all discussed." "No," I said, "it wasn't." "It absolutely was." "When?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Rachel finally spoke. "Natalie." I looked at her. "Did you ever sign a document called a family use agreement?" "No." "Not even years ago?" "I've never heard that title before today." She nodded once and went back to reading. Dad cleared his throat. "You signed a lot of paperwork over the years." "For what?" "Different family matters." "What family matters?" He shrugged. "You probably don't remember." Rachel quietly flipped another page, then another. She stopped, looked closer, pulled a pair of reading glasses from her bag. That caught my attention. She wasn't skimming anymore, she was examining it. Ethan noticed too. "Everything okay?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She traced one finger across the bottom of a page. Then she turned back to the signature page. I knew my own signature. I'd signed thousands of documents during my years as an operations manager. No two signatures are ever perfectly identical. But certain habits stay the same. The angle, the pressure, the way I crossed the T. From where I stood, something felt off. Rachel looked at me. "Would you mind bringing me one of your closing documents?" I already had the folder with me. I handed her a copy of my home purchase paperwork. She laid both signatures side by side. Nobody spoke. Even the movers had stopped pretending not to listen. One of the deputies shifted his weight but stayed silent. Rachel studied them for another minute. Then she looked at the notary section. Dad frowned. "What?" Rachel didn't respond. Instead, she flipped back to the first page and checked the date. Then the second page. Then the last. She looked at the seal again. This time, she pulled out her phone. She typed something. Waited. Read the screen. A few seconds later, she slowly lowered the phone. The confidence I'd seen in Dad's face was starting to disappear. Mom looked back and forth between them. "Ethan, where did this come from?" He frowned. Dad had it. Dad immediately answered, "You helped put everything together." "I didn't draft it." "You reviewed it." "I looked at what you gave me." Their voices started overlapping. "No, that's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened. You said it was enough. I said it needed paperwork." The deputies exchanged a quick glance. Rachel remained completely calm. She closed the folder. Then she looked directly at the sheriff's deputy. "I've found several inconsistencies. Dad took a step forward. What inconsistencies? Rachel didn't even look at him. The notary information doesn't appear to match the stated date. She rested one hand on the folder, and the signature raises additional concerns. The driveway fell completely silent. Rachel met the deputy's eyes and spoke in the same calm voice she'd used all morning. I don't think this document is authentic. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The deputy looked from Rachel to my father, then back at the folder in her hands. Dad finally broke the silence. That's ridiculous. Rachel didn't argue. She simply replied, I'm saying this document deserves a much closer examination before anyone relies on it. Ethan stepped in immediately. So that's it? You just assume we're lying? No, Rachel answered calmly. I don't assume. I compare documents. She held up my closing paperwork beside the agreement. And these don't appear consistent. Mom looked overwhelmed. This has gotten completely out of hand. I almost agreed with her. Not because Rachel was wrong, because standing in my own driveway with deputies, lawyers, and a moving truck felt surreal. This wasn't how I imagined spending my first weekend in my new home. One of the deputies spoke for the first time in several minutes. At this point, no one is entering the residence. His voice stayed even. If there are questions about these documents, they'll need to be handled through the proper legal process. Ethan threw his hands into the air. So we're just supposed to leave? I answered before anyone else could. Yes. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. You'd really do this to your own family? That question would have destroyed me a year earlier, maybe even a month earlier. This time I took a slow breath instead of apologizing. I didn't bring a moving truck to someone else's house. He looked away. Rachel quietly touched my elbow. If you're ready, she said, this would be a good time. I knew exactly what she meant. I opened my folder. There was one section I'd debated bringing. Part of me had hoped I'd never need it. I pulled out several printed bank statements. I don't want to argue, I said. I just want everyone here to understand something. Nobody interrupted. I laid the first page on the hood of my truck. 8 years ago. I pointed to a highlighted transfer. This was for Ethan's car loan. Another page. This helped cover Mom and Dad's medical bills. Another. This went into Ethan's business when it couldn't make payroll. I kept turning pages. Home repairs, credit card balances, emergency expenses. Every payment had a date. Every transfer had a record. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I was simply reading the facts. I never asked for repayment. Mom quietly wiped tears from her face. You didn't have to bring all of this up. I looked at her gently. I didn't want to. But we're standing in front of my house because everyone acted like I'd never done enough. Nobody answered. Even Ethan stayed silent. Rachel added one more folder beside mine. There's another financial issue. She looked toward the deputies. Our investigation found that Brooks Mountain Escapes accepted reservation deposits from multiple customers. She slid several printed pages forward. These payments total tens of thousands of dollars. One deputy flipped through the records. They've already collected money? Rachel nodded. From people who believed they were booking this property. The deputy's expression changed. Until then, he'd mostly been watching a family disagreement. Now he was looking at financial records involving people outside the family. The atmosphere shifted. Mom stepped closer to me. Her voice cracked. Natalie, please. She reached for my hand. We don't have to do this in front of strangers. We're family. I looked at her hand, then at the moving truck, the fake agreement, the booking records, the deputies. None of this had started because of me. I quietly stepped back. I've spent years solving problems privately. I can't do that anymore. She began crying, not loudly, just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Dad stared at the ground. Ethan looked frustrated more than anything else. For the first time, nobody was asking me to fix the situation. They were waiting to see what I would do. I reached into my folder one last time. Rachel had helped me prepare it the day before. I removed 3 sealed envelopes, one addressed to my parents, one to Ethan. I held them out. These are formal notices. My voice stayed steady. As of today, all financial assistance from me has ended. I expected the driveway to be quiet after everyone left. It wasn't. My phone started buzzing before Rachel had even driven away. The first text came from my aunt. "How could you embarrass your parents like that?" A minute later, my cousin called. I let it ring. Then another message. Then another. By dinner, I'd stopped counting. Apparently, Ethan had wasted no time telling his version of the story. According to him, I'd bought a beautiful mountain home and decided my family wasn't welcome because I'd become too successful. One relative wrote that money had changed me. Another said I was forgetting where I came from. One even told me my parents deserved better. I read every message. I didn't answer a single one. A week earlier, I probably would have spent hours trying to explain myself. Typing long paragraphs, defending every decision, apologizing for things that weren't actually my fault. This time, Rachel stopped me. "Don't argue individually." "So I just ignore them?" "No." She smiled. "You answer everyone once." That made far more sense. We spent the afternoon putting together a single email. No emotional language, no insults, no accusations. Just a timeline, copies of the property deed, screenshots of Ethan's messages, the online listings advertising my cabin, bank transfer records, the sheriff's incident number, photos of the moving truck. Everything was organized by date. Rachel read it one last time. "Perfect. You think it'll change anyone's mind?" "Not everyone's." She closed the laptop. "But facts usually travel farther than rumors. They just move a little slower." She was right. The replies didn't come immediately. They started the next morning. One cousin simply wrote, "I didn't know any of this." Another apologized for judging me too quickly. Then my uncle called. His voice sounded uneasy. "Natalie." "Yeah? I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Did Ethan ever talk to you about investors?" "No." There was a long silence. "He asked me for money last spring." "What?" "He said he was expanding a mountain rental business." I sat up straighter. "How much?" "5,000. My stomach tightened. I turned him down. Before we hung up, he added something else. I wasn't the only one he asked. That conversation opened a door. Over the next 2 days, more relatives reached out. Some admitted Ethan had approached them with the same business idea. A few had nearly invested. One cousin actually had. Little by little, the story everyone believed started falling apart. Rachel forwarded every news statement to the growing file. Then another piece of news arrived. The booking platform removed the listing, she told me over the phone. They did? Yes. They suspended the company's account while they investigate. For the first time in days, I smiled. Not because everything was fixed, because strangers wouldn't keep sending money for a cabin that was never available. Life slowly became quieter again. I unpacked more boxes, hung pictures on the walls, started drinking my morning coffee on the porch instead of at the kitchen table covered with paperwork. The silence I'd come looking for finally began returning. Then, just before sunset one evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a text. It was a motion alert from the security system. I opened the camera feed. Someone was walking behind the cabin, wearing Dad's old brown jacket. He wasn't near the front entrance. He was heading toward the back fence. I watched him stop beside the gate. He looked around carefully before reaching into his truck. A second later, he pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. I was already dialing the sheriff's office. By the time the deputy arrived, Dad was still standing near the fence. He insisted he only wanted to check the property. The deputy wasn't convinced. Because of the written notice he'd already received, he was formally warned not to return to my property again. Dad didn't argue much. He just got back into his truck and drove away. Watching him leave felt strangely sad, not satisfying, just sad. A few days later, Rachel called again. The prosecutor's office reviewed everything. I set my coffee down. And? She didn't make me wait. It's time. The case is officially moving to court. Walking into the courtroom felt strangely ordinary. No dramatic music. No angry shouting. Just people carrying folders, waiting for their names to be called. Rachel leaned over before the hearing started. Just answer what's asked. I nodded. I know. You don't have to convince anyone. She tapped the stack of documents in front of us. These will do that. She was right. When it was my turn, I wasn't asked how I felt. Nobody asked whether my parents loved me. Nobody asked who had sacrificed more for the family. The court focused on facts. The property deed, bank records, the security footage, screenshots of the online listings, copies of emails, the messages Ethan had sent before they ever showed up with the moving truck. Dad tried to explain that everything had been misunderstood. He said parents should have a place in their children's success. He talked about family obligations, about trust, about intentions. The judge listened politely, then asked one simple question. Did Ms. Brooks ever transfer ownership of the property? No. Did she sign a valid agreement granting occupancy rights? Dad hesitated. No. That was the end of the discussion. The ruling wasn't emotional. It was straightforward. The court confirmed that I was the sole legal owner of the cabin. My family was prohibited from using my name, my address, or my property for any business activity. The questionable documents were referred for further investigation. That was it. No applause, no dramatic ending. People simply stood up and left the courtroom. Outside, Ethan walked past me without saying anything. For a second, I thought he might stop. He didn't. Mom looked like she wanted to speak. Instead, she quietly followed Dad to the parking lot. Rachel waited until they drove away. How do you feel? I surprised myself. Tired. She laughed softly. That's probably the most honest answer today. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still awkward holidays. Some relatives stayed distant. Others eventually called to apologize. A few never did. I stopped expecting everyone to understand. Months passed. Brooks Mountain Escapes was officially dissolved. The booking listings disappeared. People stopped calling about vacation rentals. Mom and Dad moved into a smaller home that fit their own budget. I heard that through another relative, not through them. I also kept my promise. The monthly transfers never started again. Neither did the emergency loans. Instead of returning to corporate management, I started working independently as an operations consultant. Ironically, I still solved business problems for a living. The difference was simple. At the end of the day, I closed my laptop and walked outside. No commute, no endless meetings, just mountains. One afternoon, a letter arrived. I recognized Mom's handwriting before I opened it. It wasn't long. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask to move in. She didn't ask me to forget everything. One sentence stayed with me. Love shouldn't become ownership. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't call her. Not that day. Maybe not because I was angry anymore. I just wasn't ready to pretend everything had been repaired. Some things heal slowly. Some relationships never go back to what they were. And sometimes, that's the healthiest outcome. A few weeks later, I installed a small wooden sign beside the front gate. It wasn't fancy. Just simple black lettering. Private property. Guests. Welcome by invitation. A neighbor stopped while walking his dog. I like the sign, he said. I smiled. Thanks. It sends the right message. It does. That evening, I locked the gate before heading back toward the porch. The air was cool. The trees were quiet. For a moment, I stood there looking at the cabin that had caused so much chaos. Then I realized something. I wasn't checking the locks because I was afraid someone would come back. I was closing the gate because it was my choice. There was a difference. A much bigger one than I ever understood before. If you've made it this far, I'd really like to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you loved, even when other people didn't understand it? Let me know in the comments. I'd genuinely like to read your story.